Welcome to Night Stories from VHS Era. You've arrived at a place where the glow of old television screens, the hum of rewinding tapes, and the softness of forgotten childhood dreams come alive once more. Each night will take a quiet journey back in time to sleepy suburbs, moonlit driveways, warm summer breezes, and the kind of memories that feel just a little too magical to be real. Here you don't need to worry. Just press play and let the night unfold. Before we begin tonight's story, let's take a moment to slow down. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it gently. And now, exhale slowly through your mouth. Let the day melt away with that breath. Again, breathe in deeply. Feel your shoulders soften. Now, release and let go of everything you don't need to carry right now. Imagine you're lying on a cozy bed in your childhood room. Outside, the wind hums softly. The light from a small lamp glows like a warm memory, and the sound of a distant VHS tape spinning fills the air with comfort. You are safe. You are still. And the night is yours. Let's begin tonight's story.
Welcome to Night Stories from VHS Era. Do you remember what it felt like to have your best friend's phone number memorized by heart? Can you still recall the way your fingers danced across the rotary dial or the plastic buttons that clicked beneath your fingertips? What did it feel like to sit by the phone, waiting for it to ring, knowing exactly who it would be, even before you picked up? Stay with me, I promise. You'll not only remember the numbers, you'll remember the faces, the voices, and the pure magic of friendship that lived through a simple landline. I still remember mine, 823-7149. That was Maddie's number. No area code needed back then, just 7 digits. 7 little steps between me and laughter that could last all afternoon. It's strange, isn't it? How something as ordinary as a string of numbers could carry so much weight, could mean so much more than what it appeared to be. Back then, we didn't have smartphones with contact lists or speed dial, no saved names or emojis, no colorful avatars to remind us who was who. It was all memory, pure, honest, human memory. You either remembered your friends' numbers or you didn't get to talk to them. It was that simple. Sometimes I wonder, how did we manage to store all those numbers in our heads? And not just 1 or 2. I had at least 10 locked in tight. Maddie's, Sarah's, John's, even my Aunt Lisa's house phone. I can still see the numbers written down on the inside flap of my school binder too, just in case. Written in bubble letters with little doodles in the margins, beside a sticker of a smiley face or a Pikachu from one of those sticker machines outside the corner store. Do you remember those machines? For a quarter, you'd get a sticker wrapped in that crinkly, waxy paper. They smelled like plastic and metal and childhood. Anyway, the real prize wasn't just having the number memorized. It was what it meant. It meant freedom. It meant you could call whenever you wanted, after homework, of course, or when your parents said it was okay. I'd press each button carefully, listening to the tones, like music in a secret code only we kids understood. The ringback would echo through the kitchen, and with every second that passed, the excitement would build. Would they answer? Would we talk for 5 minutes or 5 hours? Sometimes I'd pace in little loops by the wall-mounted phone in the hallway, the one with the curly cord stretched halfway across the room because I couldn't stand still. It was avocado green, with a few scuffs along the bottom and a little chip on the side from when I dropped the receiver once too hard. My mom wasn't thrilled about that. There was something special about knowing those numbers. They weren't just digits, they were tiny memories. Each one took me to a different living room, a different smell, a different kind of laugh. John's house always smelled like cinnamon and cats. Sarah's line always had a bit of static on it, like her phone was wired through the stars. And Matty, he always picked up on the second ring, like he'd been waiting. We used to have contests, believe it or not, me and my brother. Who could remember the most numbers without looking? He always beat me with our cousins' numbers, but I had the neighborhood on lock. I used to think of phone numbers like songs. Each one had a rhythm, 823-7149. You hum it enough times and it lives in your bones. Sometimes we wrote them down on scraps of paper, tucked away inside pencil cases, behind baseball cards, inside a copy of Goosebumps or Animorphs. There was this notebook I had once, purple with glittery jelly print, and the first few pages were just phone numbers. Handwritten in different colors of gel pen, sometimes with hearts, sometimes with little lightning bolts. Looking back now, it was more than just a list. It was a directory of memories. Do you know what I miss the most? The certainty. There was no second guessing, no scrolling through contacts or trying to remember what name they're saved under. No, was it under Sarah H. or Sarah from school? If you remembered someone's number, it meant something. It meant you called them enough for it to stick. And maybe they remembered yours too. And there was a thrill in calling, wasn't there? The mystery of who would pick up. Sometimes a mom, sometimes a sibling. And you had to ask, so politely, if your friend was home. It taught us patience. It taught us respect. And most of all, it taught us that connection meant a little more when it took a little more effort. I remember sitting on the carpet with the phone nestled between my shoulder and cheek, twisting the cord around my fingers until it looked like a snake, talking about nothing and everything all at once. Whether or not we'd watched Are You Afraid of the Dark the night before, if anyone at school got in trouble, or who brought Dunkaroos in their lunchbox. We didn't need big topics. We just needed each other. There was this kind of stillness back then. No vibration in your pocket, no distractions. Just your voice and theirs, hanging in the air, echoing off the wood-paneled walls or the shaggy carpet floor. Time felt slower. Friendships felt deeper. And maybe you're wondering, what if you forgot a number? What if you didn't remember it exactly? Well, you had two options. Either check the little phone book your mom kept by the microwave, or you wait until school the next day and ask again. But once it stuck, it stayed. For years. Sometimes even now, if I close my eyes, I can hear the numbers in my head like a melody from an old cassette tape. Did we know back then that we were building something sacred? Did we understand that one day all of this would disappear into pocket screens and tap-to-call buttons? Maybe not, but maybe that's why it stayed with us. So yes, I remember what it was like to memorize my friends' phone numbers, and I remember what that memory meant. It meant love, it meant effort, it meant the kind of friendship that doesn't need a ringtone because it already lives in your heart. I still remember the hollow click of the rotary phone resetting after each dial, the way my finger would trace the familiar arc of each number, and how, after that long final rotation, I would sit there with the receiver pressed to my ear, my heart already beginning to race. Would they answer? Would it ring 5 times and stop? But more importantly, what if their parent answered instead? Have you ever felt your throat go dry just from the sound of a grown-up's voice on the other end of the line? It seems silly now, doesn't it? That a 10-year-old could feel like he was stepping onto a stage just by calling a friend. But that's what it was like back then. Making a call meant preparing for all sorts of possible outcomes. And the scariest of them all wasn't a busy tone or no answer. It was Mr. Thompson picking up the line in that low, slow voice of his, clearing his throat like he was about to quiz me on my intentions. Why was it so nerve-wracking to talk to someone's mom or dad? I suppose part of it was the formality. In school, adults were principals or teachers, people you knew had a reason to talk to you. But at home, it was different. A parent answering the phone meant you were entering their world, even if just for a moment. It meant you had to be polite, clear, and respectful, all while remembering your friend's name, your own name, and the reason you were calling. A monumental task when your palms were sweating and you weren't even sure if you had dialed the right number. Hello? That single word could send shivers down your spine. My go-to line was always, "Hi, is Josh there, please?" I'd practiced it in my head over and over. Still, the delivery never came out quite right. Sometimes it sounded too rushed, like I was trying to get through the call as quickly as possible. Other times, I'd forget the please, or worse, forget to say who I was. There was nothing quite like hearing a confused adult on the other end say, "Who's calling?" and realizing you had one chance to say your name without your voice cracking. Have you ever had to rehearse something so simple so many times just because you knew an adult might be listening? It wasn't just fear either. There was this underlying respect, like you were stepping into someone's home, even if it was only through sound. You could often hear the clinking of dishes in the background, or a dog barking, or a baby crying. There was life on the other end of that line, life you weren't part of, so you had to tread carefully. And yet, there was a strange kind of growth in those moments. We didn't know it at the time, but each phone call was like a mini lesson in social courage. We were learning how to speak up, how to address someone older, how to show respect even when nervous. We didn't have texting to hide behind or caller ID to prepare us. It was raw, real, and a little terrifying. Do you remember how your voice would rise an octave when someone's dad answered? Or how you'd cover the mouthpiece with your hand, mouthing, "It's his dad," to your sibling across the room? Sometimes I'd try to recognize the voice right away. If it was soft and kind, I knew I was talking to Mrs. Levin. She always spoke like she was in the middle of folding laundry or stirring something on the stove. "Hello, sweetheart, who's calling?" she'd say. That tone made it easier. But when it was Mr. Levin, with his deep, slightly annoyed tone, I'd have to steel myself. "Josh can't come to the phone right now. Can I take a message?" What message could a 10-year-old possibly leave? I never knew what to say. Just tell him I called? Sounded weak even as I said it. And then there was the awkward pause before hanging up, never sure if I should say goodbye or wait to be dismissed. But for all the tension, there were little victories too, like the first time a parent recognized your voice. "Oh, it's you again, Michael. Let me go get Josh for you." I remember beaming after that. It meant I was known. It meant I was part of that household in a tiny, invisible way. I had made it past the first layer. I was becoming a familiar friend, not just a name on the line. And sometimes, if you got lucky, the parent would offer you a glimpse into your friend's world. "He's out riding bikes. Should be back in 10 minutes. Want to call again?" That simple sentence meant everything. It meant Josh was out doing the very thing we'd planned to do together. It meant there was still time for adventure before the sun set. Do you remember the sound of disappointment when your friend wasn't home? That hollow little, "Oh, okay," followed by the click of the phone being placed gently back in its cradle? And yet, those missed calls never really ruined our day. We'd try again later, or maybe ride our bikes over to see if they were back yet. But that call, that first call, always started with the same moment of uncertainty. Would it be your friend, or would you have to navigate the adult world once again? There were no shortcuts, no direct lines, no texting "you home" or "can I call" beforehand. Just dialing the number and hoping. It shaped us in small, quiet ways. We learned patience. We learned how to pause, listen, and speak clearly. We learned how to introduce ourselves and ask for what we wanted. And perhaps most importantly, we learned how to be brave in the smallest, most everyday of moments. So now, when I look back, I don't just remember the thrill of talking to my friends. I remember the butterflies in my stomach before the call. I remember the rehearsed lines, the sweaty palms, the voices of people I never saw in person but came to know through brief, nervous interactions. It makes me wonder, did those parents remember us too? Did they ever talk about Michael, that polite boy who always calls for Josh? Did they smile when they heard our timid little voices on the line? I like to think they did. I like to think they noticed. The kitchen phone was the heart of the house. It was mounted on the wall near the pantry, just close enough to the stove that my mom could stir a pot and answer it at the same time, and just far enough from the table that we had to stretch the cord across chairs and counters whenever we tried to sneak a private conversation. It had that thick plastic handset that always felt a little too big in my hands. And the cord, that cord was the real star of the show. Long, tangled, alive in its own way. It was always coiled and twisted like it had its own memory of every time we'd stretched it too far or yanked it around a corner. No matter how carefully we hung it back up, it would stay knotted and stubborn. My mom used to try to untwist it by letting the handset hang and spin on its own, but even gravity couldn't fight years of abuse from curious kids and chatty teenagers. And yet, it was perfect. The kitchen phone was where everything happened. It was our command center. If you stood in the right spot, you could still keep an eye on the oven, hear the TV in the living room, and peek through the window above the sink to see who was coming up the driveway. That phone knew every secret, every emergency, every grocery list and birthday plan. It heard laughter, whispered gossip, bad news delivered in soft tones, and excitement bubbling up when a sleepover was confirmed. And for me, it was the stage for every long phone call with my best friends. You'd pick up the receiver, pull the cord as far as it would go, and then do this little dance to find the most comfortable, most private spot, usually sitting on the floor by the fridge or kneeling behind the kitchen counter. You always had to be strategic about it. The cord was long, but not endless. It had just enough give to reach the hallway if you leaned hard and stretched it under your arm. But every inch you pulled meant the cord would twist tighter around itself. And the tighter it got, the more likely it was to snap back with that little recoil that felt like the phone was biting you. I cannot count how many times I found myself completely tangled in that cord by the end of a conversation. Somehow, without realizing it, I'd have looped it around my wrist 3 times, slid it under my knee, and twisted it around my ankle until standing up became an obstacle course. I'd be so lost in conversation that the cord turned into a snake, winding itself through my legs, under the chair, and around the phone base until I looked like a cartoon character trying to escape from yarn. Did that ever happen to you too? There was something deeply comforting about it, though. That cord, as annoying as it could be, grounded you. It was a physical connection to something real. You weren't just talking into space. You were literally tethered to the call. The weight of the receiver in your hand, the stretch of the cord when you leaned too far, the way it would brush your arm or tug slightly when you shifted, it made the conversation feel more present, more alive. And those conversations lasted forever. We talked about everything and nothing. About school, teachers, which Ninja Turtle was the best, what movie we wanted to rent that weekend, whether anyone had heard the latest rumor at recess. It didn't matter what time it was or how little there was to say. Just being on the phone felt important, like you had reached some new level of friendship, some deeper bond that only existed in the quiet hours between homework and dinner. And even then, privacy was a myth. No matter how far you pulled that cord, someone always walked by. A parent getting a snack, a sibling making a face and mouthing something ridiculous to make you laugh, the dog sniffing you like you were doing something suspicious. You could never fully escape, but that made the effort all the more noble. You shielded the mouthpiece with your hand. You whispered secrets like the cord itself might snitch. You built a world out of hushed tones and tangled limbs. Sometimes, if the cord got too twisted, the phone would fall off the wall. That was the worst. The loud smack of plastic on tile would echo through the house like an alarm. My mom would shout from the other room, "What was that?" And I'd scramble to pick it up, tangled and apologetic, whispering into the receiver, "Hold on, I dropped it." You'd fumble the handset, straighten the cord a little, and then slide back into place like nothing had happened. There was an unspoken rule that the kitchen phone belonged to everyone, but that somehow in those moments when we were curled up by the cabinets with the cord stretched to its limits, it belonged to us. It was the physicality of it all that made it special. Today, calls are weightless. We walk and talk, we put people on speaker, we switch between apps and scroll while we speak. But back then, being on the phone meant you were on the phone. It was a choice, a commitment. You couldn't walk too far, you couldn't multitask. You had to sit, stay, and talk. And in that stillness, friendships grew. Do you remember tracing the spiral of the cord with your fingers while you listened? Or lying on your stomach with the cord pulled tight against your shoulder, twirling it absent-mindedly as your friend told a long story? There was poetry in that simplicity. We didn't need face filters or read receipts. We had our voices, our laughter, and a cord that refused to behave. And maybe, just maybe, that's what made it all feel so real. Because you couldn't fake being there. You were tangled, grounded, present. And as the evening light faded through the kitchen window and the smell of dinner started drifting through the house, you knew the call would end soon. You'd say your drawn-out goodbyes, maybe throw in a last-minute plan for the weekend. Then you'd hang up with a soft click, shake the pins and needles from your leg, and stand up slowly, still dragging the cord with you until it bounced back to its original shape like nothing had happened. Only it had happened. That call, that connection, that beautiful little moment of getting tangled up in someone else's world and letting them get tangled in yours. Night had its own set of rules, especially in a house where walls were thin and creaky floors told on you. After dinner, after dishes were stacked and lights began to dim room by room, a sort of hush would fall over the house. It was that delicate time when yawns started appearing. Moms folded blankets, dads flicked through channels with heavy eyes, and younger siblings were already halfway to dreams. The house was winding down. And if you were lucky, if you had managed to finish your homework and avoided getting grounded, this was when the real connection started. The late night call. It was the most dangerous kind, not for what was said, but for how it had to be said. Whispered, featherlight, like secrets passed in code. Every word had to be carefully measured, each syllable softened into the air so that it didn't travel too far, didn't ricochet down the hall or bounce off the ceiling and into your parents' bedroom. It was a social tightrope, a balancing act of expression and stealth. One too loud laugh, one misplaced giggle, and the entire mission would collapse. But still, we did it. We waited until the hallway light was off, until the murmurs from the TV in the living room turned into background fuzz, until the click of the coffee maker told us our parents had truly given up on being awake. Then, phone in hand, we slipped under the covers or behind the door, breathing slowly, trying not to wake the wooden floor beneath our feet. Sometimes, I'd take the phone all the way to my closet. I'd sit there in the dark, cross-legged, with a sweater draped over the crack beneath the door. It muffled everything, my voice, the occasional sneeze, the accidental knee knock against a shoebox. It was like entering another universe, one where the rules of the daytime didn't apply. I didn't have to raise my hand to speak or worry about a teacher interrupting. There were no time limits, no homework between thoughts, just my voice and theirs whispering through the night. And in that whispering, a new kind of intimacy was born. It was different than the usual kitchen phone conversations. During the day, you could talk freely. You could laugh, sigh, even shout if the story demanded it. But at night, with the whole house asleep, your voice had to transform. It had to adapt. You had to find a rhythm where every sentence was a soft breeze, where every laugh was swallowed halfway, held back by a hand over your mouth. It was like becoming someone else, a secret version of yourself, who existed only in the dark, in the quiet, in the spaces where others were not listening. It felt like training for something bigger, like we were undercover agents transmitting coded messages, planning future missions, talking about crushes, dreams, fears. Our voices were so low we could barely hear ourselves sometimes. We relied on context, on the little pauses, on the soft intakes of breath that meant someone was still listening. And when we laughed, when we couldn't hold it back, it was the best kind of laughter, the kind that had to be hidden, the kind that made your whole body shake while you clenched your jaw and covered the receiver with both hands. It was in those whispers that some of the most important things were ever said. Things you'd never say in the daylight. Confessions, hopes, the feeling of not fitting in, the worry that a parent was mad at you, the uncertainty of growing up, the wondering if someone liked you back. You whispered these things not because you were afraid, but because the night gave them more weight. There was a reverence in how softly you said them, like you didn't want to break them by speaking too loud. And sometimes silence was part of the conversation too. You'd sit there, both on the line, not saying anything for a few minutes, just being there, listening to each other breathe, feeling the comfort of not needing to fill every second with words, knowing that this person on the other end of the line was choosing to share their quiet with you. That was its own kind of trust. Of course, the risk of getting caught was always present. You'd hear footsteps down the hall and your stomach would flip. The door creaked and you'd hit the mute button with lightning speed, pretending to stretch or fake sleeping. Once, I dropped the phone between the bed and the wall, and I had to fish it out in complete silence while my dad peeked in to just check if the lights were off. He never suspected a thing. Or maybe he did, and just didn't want to ruin the moment. But the thrill of it, that's what made it stick in memory. We were whispering, yes, but we were also building something. Late night conversations had a strange magic. They didn't disappear like the ones during the day. They lingered. They carved little notches in your memory, in the way you felt about someone. Because anyone who was willing to stay up just to talk with you in the dark, that meant something. And that meant you whispered a little softer, listened a little harder. I remember the feeling of finally hanging up, slowly placing the phone back on the cradle like it was made of glass, and then lying there in the dark, eyes wide open. Not tired, not quite ready for sleep, just floating in the afterglow of connection, going over the conversation again in my head, replaying each detail, each joke, each pause, hoping nothing had been forgotten, smiling into the dark because someone out there had been smiling too. The next morning, no one would know. You'd wake up with that quiet satisfaction. Your parents would be pouring cereal. Your siblings would be arguing over the TV remote. The dog would be barking at a squirrel. And you'd just be there, a little sleepy, a little smug, holding on to your secret. Because the night before, while the rest of the world slept, you had lived a little more, whispered a little deeper. You had shared your voice with someone who really heard it. And somehow, even though the world was loud again, you could still feel that hush inside you, like it was waiting for the next call, the next mission, the next moment when the house would fall silent again and the whisper hours would return. Oh, and there was a certain kind of determination that lived in the fingertips of kids who grew up dialing phones instead of tapping screens. Back then, if you wanted to reach someone, it wasn't just a matter of pressing a name in your contact list. It required a memory of numbers, sometimes jotted down on scraps of paper or memorized through sheer force of repetition. It required patience. It required a bit of luck. And it often required dealing with one of the most frustrating sounds ever created, the busy signal. That shrill, pulsing tone, it was mechanical, cold, repetitive, almost like a scolding, like the phone was telling you to come back later, like it was guarding your friend's voice behind a wall you couldn't climb yet. You'd press the handset to your ear, hoping to hear a ring, but instead you got that staccato beep that instantly dashed your hopes. It meant someone else had beaten you to it. Maybe another friend, maybe a sibling hogging the line, maybe a parent deep in a long-distance conversation. And yet, we didn't give up. We didn't wait 20 minutes. We didn't get distracted and go do something else. No, we redialed over and over, with the kind of stubbornness usually reserved for people climbing mountains or solving puzzles that took weeks. Our fingers hovered over the keypad, hearts pounding just a little, almost superstitious about the timing. Maybe if we waited 5 seconds, maybe if we waited 10, maybe this next call would be the one. We'd press the buttons again, holding our breath with each beep. It became a kind of ritual. You'd sit there in the kitchen, or on the carpet by the phone table in the hallway, or curled up on the couch with the handset in your lap. Sometimes you'd lean back, pressing the receiver between your shoulder and your ear, your hands free to fidget with the cord or drum against your knees. Your other hand would hover, ready for the moment the call failed again, ready to hit the redial button if your phone had one, or retype the number from scratch if it didn't. There was something about the rhythm of it that made the wait bearable. Dial, wait, busy signal, click, dial again, and repeat. You didn't feel foolish, you felt determined. You weren't being ignored, you were just caught in a game of telephone timing, trying to slide your call into the narrow window between one conversation ending and another one beginning. It was like a race without a finish line, or a dance where you never knew if the music would stop long enough for you to be let in. Eventually, when the tone finally changed and you heard that glorious first ring, it was electric. Suddenly your whole body straightened, your heart skipped, you almost didn't breathe. There it was, a chance. Maybe they'd answer. Maybe the phone was ringing in some other room, your friend racing to get to it before someone else did. You could picture it, their footsteps, their voice yelling that they'd get it, and then that soft click, the connection made, the static coming to life, and a familiar hello that made the whole ritual worthwhile. There was a special kind of joy in that hello, not just because of who was on the other end, but because you had fought for it. You had earned it. You had faced the obstacle and overcome it with sheer willpower and timing. And that made the conversation sweeter, more valuable. You didn't just stumble into it, you made it happen. You got through. But there was also strategy. We learned through trial and error the best times to call. Avoid dinner hours. Try after homework. Know when parents watched the news. Recognize the signs of a family that went to bed early. Adjust your redial patterns accordingly. It was almost like studying someone's life just through their phone habits. You built a mental map of routines, all so you could hear someone's voice on the other end. And of course, this wasn't just a solo experience. Sometimes friends would coordinate. If you were calling someone and it was busy, you'd hang up and call your other friend instead, just to vent. You'd say, "I've been trying for 10 minutes and it's still busy." They'd suggest tricks. Unplug and plug back in. Try from another phone in the house. or time it to the commercials during their favorite show. It wasn't just about calling, it was about cracking the code. Parents noticed too. There were days when your mom or dad would raise an eyebrow at how many times you walked past the kitchen, phone in hand, sighing dramatically. Sometimes they'd laugh. Other times they'd warn you not to tie up the line. But there was a silent understanding. They had been there too, years earlier, waiting for their own chance to talk to someone who mattered. That's what it really was, beneath all the persistence. Someone mattered. Enough to keep calling. Enough to try again and again. We didn't care how many times we heard that busy tone. It wasn't rejection. It was a delay, a challenge, a reminder that real connection was worth a few obstacles, worth a few dozen redials, worth the wait. I remember one afternoon I called a friend 12 times. 12! I counted. Each time the signal mocked me, and each time I sat up straighter, more determined. Finally, on the 13th try, the line rang. I remember that moment vividly. The relief, the anticipation, the happiness that came not just from the conversation, but from having reached it on my own. No shortcuts, just persistence. We don't hear busy signals anymore. Our phones go straight to voicemail, or they ring forever, or we text instead. We don't get that immediate, unmistakable beep telling us to try again later. And maybe that's a good thing. But sometimes I miss the honesty of it, the simplicity. It forced us to be patient, to work for the things we wanted, to keep trying, not just for connection, but for the sake of being heard. In a way, the busy signal taught us about effort. It showed us that even small things required energy, that friendship wasn't always easy, that timing mattered, that persistence was sometimes the only way through, and that when you did finally connect, the reward wasn't just in the voice that answered, it was in knowing that you never gave up trying to hear it. And I think there's something beautiful in that. If patience had a training ground, it was a house with one phone line and too many people wanting to use it. In those days, the home phone wasn't just a device. It was a shared territory, a point of tension, negotiation, and compromise. It wasn't yours, it belonged to everyone. And if someone else was on it, you waited. Sometimes quietly, sometimes not, but you waited. The sound of the phone being used was unmistakable. That dull hum when you picked up and realized the line was already engaged. Sometimes you could even hear the murmurs of the conversation if the other handset didn't quite hang up right. It was like eavesdropping by accident, like getting a whiff of someone else's life when all you wanted was to dial a number and say hello to your friend. You'd hear a parent talking to a relative, a sibling giggling with a crush, a grandparent on the line with the pharmacy, and you knew your turn wasn't now. So you paced. You lingered near the kitchen or hallway, trying not to hover too obviously. You sat on the couch with one ear tilted toward the room where the phone conversation was happening. Sometimes you'd make little comments like, "Are you almost done?" or "I just need a quick call," hoping your voice would carry enough weight to speed things along without starting a family argument. Other times you'd silently fume, watching the clock tick with agonizing slowness, calculating how long you could wait before your chance slipped away completely. Because it wasn't just about calling when you wanted, it was about catching that narrow window when the phone was free and your friend was still around to answer. Miss it and you might not get another shot until the next day. You learned quickly that timing was everything. You couldn't just demand access. You had to observe the rhythms of your household. When Mom usually talked to Aunt Carol, when Dad got his daily check-in call from work, when your older sister camped out on the phone for what felt like hours. You adapted, you strategized, and sometimes you lost. You'd finally get the phone, dial with anticipation, only to hear your friend's dad answer and say they just left. Or worse, you'd hear the line was busy on their end now. One delay set off a chain reaction of missed chances, and you'd sit there, receiver in hand, wondering how something as simple as a conversation could be so elusive in a house full of voices. But those waits shaped us. They taught us about sharing, even when it was inconvenient. They taught us about listening, even when we didn't want to. And they taught us how to manage our impatience, how to sit with anticipation instead of instant gratification. We didn't have private lines. We didn't have personal smartphones. Our world was connected through cords and courtesy. I remember evenings when I sat at the foot of the stairs, glancing down the hallway where my sister twirled the phone cord around her finger, her voice hushed and dreamy as she talked to whoever made her laugh that way. I'd sigh dramatically, hoping she'd get the hint. She never did, or pretended not to. And still, I waited, because I had to. And there was also this strange sense of fairness in the system. Everyone got their time, eventually. You learned that your 10-minute call might come at the cost of someone else's. So you measured your words. You didn't ramble. You made the call count. And when your turn came, it felt earned, like the phone had finally passed into your hands, blessed by the patience of all who came before. Sometimes the waiting sparked creativity. You'd write notes while you waited, scripting out what you wanted to say. You'd rehearse a joke in your head. You'd daydream about the conversation, building it up like a scene in a movie. And then, when the line was yours and the connection was made, it felt like stepping into a spotlight you had been circling for hours. You didn't waste it, you soaked it in. Of course, there were battles too. Arguments over fairness, accusations of hogging the phone, timed limits enforced by parents who kept a mental stopwatch. You've been on for 20 minutes, give someone else a chance. That sentence echoed through many households like a referee's whistle. It was rarely met with enthusiasm, but it restored balance, at least temporarily. Some households had rules. Phone hours posted on the fridge. A sign taped to the receiver that said, "Back in 10 minutes." A kitchen timer set beside the phone, ticking like a bomb. Some families eventually got a second line, usually for business or teenagers with particularly active social lives. But most of us learned to share, not because we wanted to, but because we had no other choice. And honestly, something about that enforced patience created a depth in our interactions. You didn't take your call for granted. You listened more carefully. You chose your words more thoughtfully. You knew someone else was waiting, and that gave every minute weight. It wasn't just time, it was shared time, borrowed time, precious, even in its limitations. Looking back now, I realize those moments helped define how we communicated. We didn't always get what we wanted when we wanted it, but we adapted. We grew more mindful, more considerate, more aware of others. And maybe that's what made the conversations feel richer, more intentional. You had to want it enough to wait, and that changed everything. The line, after all, wasn't just a cord. It was a symbol of connection, of community, of compromise. And as frustrating as it sometimes was to hear someone's already on the phone, it also reminded us that we weren't alone in wanting to be heard. We were part of something bigger, a family, a home, a shared space where voices had to take turns. And in that turning, we learned something timeless. That connection isn't just about talking. It's about listening, about waiting, about understanding that sometimes, to be heard, you have to be patient first. Privacy in a 90s household was more of a concept than a reality. Every room had walls, sure, but sounds traveled. And when it came to phone calls, those sacred teenage conversations filled with secrets, stories, and sighs, having everyone around turned each word into a covert operation. It wasn't just about what you said, but how you said it, how quietly, how vaguely, how coded, because someone was always in earshot. The kitchen was often the stage. The receiver mounted to the wall with its long, curly cord stretched to its limit as you tried to inch your way to the pantry or behind the fridge, anywhere to carve out a sliver of privacy. But the space wasn't yours. The clinking of dishes, the clatter of silverware, the shuffle of siblings looking for snacks, it all echoed around you. You'd cover your free ear with a hand, hoping to muffle the chaos, while your voice dropped to a low, guarded tone. Even then, you could feel eyes on you. That's when the real acrobatics began. You learned to say everything while saying nothing. You'd mention that thing we talked about, or whisper, "Yeah, it happened again," letting your friend on the other end fill in the blanks. Euphemisms became your best friend, and vague expressions did the heavy lifting. If you had a crush, you didn't name them. If someone said something hurtful at school, you called it the situation. Every phone call was a balancing act between honesty and ambiguity. The worst moments came when someone decided to linger. A sibling would sit nearby, pretending to read a comic but clearly tuned in. A parent would move around slowly, wiping a counter that was already clean, trying not to appear obvious but failing. Sometimes they were just going about their lives. Sometimes they were curious. Either way, it meant your call had an audience, and that changed everything. Your sentences became shorter, safer. You hesitated more often, laughed nervously, gave up on topics you actually cared about. The phone, once a portal to connection, became a tightrope you walked with caution. You could feel the weight of the unspoken pressure. Say too much and you might face awkward questions later. Say too little and your friend might feel shut out. It was a no-win situation, and yet we played it over and over. One of the classic maneuvers was to drag the cord as far as it would go. Around a doorway, into a hallway, maybe even to the stairs if you were lucky. You hoped for a corner, a closet, any place where words could be just yours. But cords only reached so far, and walls only muffled so much. If your brother turned on the TV too loud, or your mom started the blender, your whispered conversation dissolved into static. You'd cup your hand over the receiver and shout, "Can you turn that down?" only to be met with shrugs or passive-aggressive replies. "It's a shared house," they'd say, and they were right. Some of the funniest and most frustrating memories came from trying to spell things in code. Did you hear what happened with S yesterday? S as in Samantha or as in soccer practice? No, S as in you-know-who from math class. And on it went, a labyrinth of initials and abbreviations that made sense only in the fragile bubble of shared teenage brainwaves. Missteps were common, names slipped, secrets leaked, and afterward, you'd hear it at dinner. "So, who's this mysterious person from math class?" And you'd freeze, wondering how thin the walls had been that day. But you learned to adapt. You got clever, strategic. You knew which times were safest, when everyone else was distracted, out of the house, or deep into their own routines. You began to anticipate interruptions. You had fallback stories in case someone asked what you were talking about. You rehearsed your tone, making serious things sound casual and casual things sound like nothing. You became a conversational ninja, slipping in and out of emotional truths with the stealth of someone who knew their privacy could vanish at any second. And in the middle of all that effort, you grew closer to the people on the other end of the line. Because they understood. They were doing the same thing in their own homes, dodging siblings and whispering behind curtains. You shared tips, like which words to avoid, and how to decode a muffled, "uh-huh," that meant, "I can't talk right now, call me later." There was a kind of intimacy in those challenges, a bond formed through the mutual struggle of trying to be real in a world that barely gave you space. What's strange now, looking back, is how those tiny battles for privacy, for space, for voice felt monumental at the time. A single call could make or break your night. A conversation cut short by a nosy parent could ruin your mood. And yet, even those interruptions became part of the ritual. The call wasn't just about words. It was about navigating the minefield between your personal world and your family's shared space. It was about claiming just 5 minutes to be your unfiltered self, or as close to that as the walls would allow. Eventually, of course, things changed. Cordless phones gave us a little more freedom. Bedrooms became more private. And then everything moved to text and screens, with earbuds in and doors closed. But something got lost in that transition. The subtle skill of saying something without saying too much. The quiet strength it took to hold back and still be understood. The unspoken pact between two people whispering in different homes, trying to stay connected in a world full of noise. That delicate dance of truth and discretion, of presence and restraint, taught us more than we realized. It made us more careful, more intentional, and maybe even more sincere. Because when you can't just spill everything out, every word you choose matters a little more. Every moment becomes sharper, and even in the chaos of a full house, a tiny corner with a phone and a voice on the other end could feel like the only private place left on Earth. Some memories from the 90s feel like relics from another universe, and among them, few shine as brightly or as mischievously as the art of the prank call. It wasn't just a childhood rite of passage, it was an adrenaline rush disguised as a joke, a rebellion disguised as a game. It was also one of the few things that could instantly turn a dull afternoon into an unforgettable evening of uncontrollable laughter and hushed panic. The setup was always the same. A group of us, usually sprawled on the living room carpet or piled into someone's basement, would huddle around the house phone. Snacks half-eaten, soda cans sweating on the table, and someone, usually the one with the best fake voice, would be handed the receiver like it was a golden microphone. We whispered and giggled and dared each other with wide eyes. The room would go dead silent the moment they dialed. And then it would begin. "Hello, is your refrigerator running?" The old classic. If the person on the other end answered yes, the punchline practically shouted itself. "Then you better go catch it!" And even if they hung up right after, even if they yelled or cursed or didn't find it funny at all, the group would explode into laughter, rolling on the floor and clutching our sides like it was the most brilliant thing ever said. Because to us, it was. It wasn't just about the joke, it was the thrill of getting away with something a little bit bad. There were rules, of course, although no one ever wrote them down. No calling neighbors. No targeting the same number twice. No prank calling anyone's grandma. But everything else was fair game. We'd flip through the yellow pages or grab the community phone book, land on a name we didn't recognize, and plan the script like tiny comedy writers. Sometimes it was a fake survey. Other times, we'd pretend to be from a pizza place confirming an order for 15 anchovy pies. Every new idea brought a wave of creativity, a spark of joy, a touch of guilt, and a heavy dose of laughter. But the best part, the absolute heart-pounding, breath-catching moment, was hanging up. That sudden clatter as the receiver slammed down. That split second of silence where everyone just stared at each other, wide-eyed, mouths open. And then the eruption of noise. Shrieking, snorting, someone falling off the couch. It was an emotional roller coaster with only 2 tracks, terror and hilarity. We'd rewind it over and over, mimicking the voice, retelling the call as if it had just won an award. Sometimes we'd feel bad for about 5 seconds, but mostly we felt alive. There were always risks, and we knew it. Caller ID wasn't widespread yet, but some families had it, and some people just had a way of figuring things out. Once, we got a call back. That was the ultimate horror story. The phone rang, and someone picked up without checking who it was. A confused adult voice asked to speak to one of us by name. Hearts dropped. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. We denied everything, blamed each other, blamed a cousin, blamed static interference. And for the rest of the night, we stayed far away from the phone like it was radioactive. Still, we didn't stop. We just got smarter. Changed our voices more, spaced out the calls. One friend started using an empty soda can as a makeshift voice modifier. Another insisted we talk through a sock for a muffled effect, which only made us laugh harder. The calls themselves weren't just jokes. They were team efforts, an outlet for imagination and connection. And they turned the phone from a family utility into a tool for spontaneous joy. The beauty of it all was in its temporary nature. Each prank call existed for maybe a minute, maybe less, and yet the memories lingered far longer. We'd talk about them for weeks, giving each call a nickname, creating legends around the reactions. The guy who thought we were aliens, the woman who offered us cookies even after we called pretending to be ghosts, the grumpy man who said he was calling the FBI. Those stories became part of our friendship, our childhood folklore. Eventually, technology changed things. Caller ID became standard. Star 69 became a threat. And when cell phones entered the scene, the risk of being tracked made prank calling feel less innocent, more dangerous. We grew up. We stopped dialing random numbers and started texting our real friends. The phone's purpose shifted. It became efficient, quiet, private. And those silly, spontaneous group moments faded like so many of the other echoes of the 90s. But now and then, the memory resurfaces like a sudden, unexplained giggle. Someone says, "Remember when we called that guy and pretended to be from a radio station?" And just like that, it's back. The rush, the ridiculousness, the bond it created. We weren't trying to be mean. We weren't trying to hurt anyone. We just wanted to be heard, to be silly, to create something out of nothing for a moment that mattered to no one but us. It was chaos. It was joy. It was rebellion in the safest possible form. And above all, it was ours. A snapshot of a time when the world was simpler, the rules were looser, and laughter didn't come from a screen, but from the sound of a phone hitting the cradle and the echo of friends losing it on the living room floor. Before smartphones and instant messaging, before notifications and read receipts dictated the pace of our relationships, there was a quieter kind of connection, one that crackled with static, rang through the house like a trumpet of attention, and sometimes, if you were lucky, was just for you. And when it was, it felt like magic. Like the world had stopped spinning for a moment, paused to acknowledge that you mattered enough for someone to reach across time and wires just to hear your voice. You'd hear the phone ring in the distance. Maybe you were in the backyard. Maybe you were in your room flipping through a magazine or writing in a notebook. The sound cut through everything. And then came the footsteps. Someone answering the phone, followed by a beat of silence, and then your name echoing through the house. That one word was all it took. A simple "it's for you" sent your heart into a flutter. You'd leap up, try not to sound too eager, but inside it was fireworks. There was something deeply affirming about it. It wasn't your birthday. It wasn't a parent telling you to come home. It wasn't someone asking for your sibling. It was a friend, maybe a crush, maybe someone you'd spoken to earlier that day, but who still wanted to talk again. And that meant something. It meant they were thinking of you. It meant you were missed. It meant you were enough, as you were, without any performance or agenda. The way you held the receiver changed when the call was for you. It wasn't just a piece of plastic and cord anymore. It was a lifeline. You twirled the spiral cord between your fingers absent-mindedly, pacing slowly from kitchen to hallway to stairwell, dragging the cord along like a secret pet. Your voice softened, Your laugh became more real, and the house faded into the background, because for those few minutes, it was just the two of you. Sometimes the calls were short and silly, just checking in, just to say hi, just because they were bored and thought of you. Other times, they went long into the night. You'd talk about school, teachers you liked or loathed, songs you had stuck in your head, the strange dream you had, or what you thought the moon looked like that night. You could talk about everything and nothing, and that was the beauty of it. When someone called just to talk to you, it meant you were more than part of the group. You were a person who stood out, a person someone chose to reach for, not because they needed anything, but because they wanted your company. And in a world where most of us were still learning who we were, those moments helped shape our sense of worth. They whispered, even if silently, "You matter." If the call came from a crush, that feeling multiplied by 100. Your palms got sweaty, you suddenly forgot how to sit still. You'd try not to sound too excited, too interested, too obvious. But the butterflies in your stomach didn't care. They fluttered anyway. Every word was measured, but every pause was loaded. Even the silence carried weight. And when they said your name gently or laughed at your joke, it felt like a private symphony playing just for you. And there was trust involved, too, because calls like that didn't just happen at random. They came after shared moments, hallway glances, lunch table conversations, inside jokes passed like notes between classes. The call was the continuation of a thread already started in real life. It was a way of saying, "I heard you today, but I want to hear more." And so we opened up. We spoke about fears and dreams, about parents and pressure, about who we wanted to become. Sometimes we cried quietly. Sometimes we said things we'd never say face to face. And sometimes we just sat in silence, breathing together across the line. In those days, no one texted, "I'm outside," or "call me later." You just called. You took the risk. If they weren't home, you hung up or left a message. If they were busy, you tried again tomorrow. But when it worked, when the planets aligned and someone answered and it turned out they were calling just for you, well, that was rare air. That was real. The simplicity of it is almost unfathomable now. Today, we're surrounded by pings and alerts, likes and emojis. We're always reachable, and yet somehow we feel less connected. But back then, a phone call wasn't just a formality. It was an act of intention, of presence. You had to be there. You had to listen. You had to give something of yourself. And in return, you received something honest, something human. Even now, if I close my eyes, I can remember the weight of the receiver in my hand, the way I'd tuck myself into a corner of the hallway, back pressed against the wall, talking in low tones so no one would eavesdrop. I can hear the voice on the other end, not loud, not dramatic, just warm, just willing, just calling to talk to me. And that was enough to make the whole day feel different. That's how friendship was built, layer by layer, like bricks in a wall that would someday hold up all the important parts of who we became. Not by big events or showy gestures, but by a voice, a ring, and the knowledge that out of all the numbers they could have dialed, they chose yours. That's how you knew you weren't alone. That's how you knew you were seen. That's how you knew, on that one small, crackling, static-filled line, you mattered. No matter how special the conversation was, no matter how heartfelt or hilarious, there was always a ticking clock somewhere in the background, and that clock was firmly controlled by the parents. You could be mid-laugh, mid-secret, mid-story, and suddenly the voice from the other room would cut through the air like a buzzer at the end of a game. "You've been on the phone for too long," the warning came, sharp and unmistakable. The moment your parents stepped into that role, the magic of the call was forced to press pause, sometimes abruptly, always reluctantly. Phones weren't unlimited back then. Every minute counted, not just in terms of time, but in how it impacted the monthly bill that your family would have to pay. The dial-up, the long-distance charges, the surcharges for after hours, all these were very real consequences that added weight to the fun. Your parents weren't just being mean or strict. They were guardians of the household budget, protectors against surprise expenses that could easily balloon if you weren't careful. This meant every phone call was a delicate balancing act. You learned to read the subtle cues, the sigh from the living room, the slow creak of footsteps on hardwood floors, the half-hidden glance toward the kitchen where the phone sat tethered to the wall by its long, twisty cord. You'd try to keep your voice low, your laughs controlled, your stories brief, but sometimes the conversation just took on a life of its own. And that's when the dreaded parental interjection would arrive. It wasn't just about the money either. It was about time. The time your parents expected you to spend on homework, on chores, on getting ready for bed. The time they wanted to carve out for the family to be together without the constant buzzing of a phone line. The time to create boundaries in a world that was beginning to demand more of your attention every day. And so, their voice was like a reality check, a reminder that no matter how much you wanted to stay connected to your friends, you still lived under their roof, by their rules. Sometimes when the words, "You've been on the phone for too long," echoed through the walls, it was met with frustration. You'd protest quietly, "Just one more minute," or "I'm almost done," but the answer was always the same. Eventually, you'd have to say goodbye, put down the receiver, and feel that faint sting of disappointment as the connection cut off. The silence that followed was sometimes louder than the ring itself. But looking back, those interruptions were a strange kind of blessing. They taught you the art of timing, when to call, how long to talk, when to say what. They introduced you to patience and compromise. They taught you how to sneak in one last joke before the line went dead, or how to leave a message in code so your friend would understand to call back later. They were small lessons wrapped in everyday moments. The end of the month was especially tense. You'd hear the shuffle of bills, the concerned whispers between parents, the calculating looks passed over kitchen tables. The telephone bill was the silent reminder of all those minutes spent in laughter, in secrets, in friendship. It was a real cost for a real connection. And sometimes, just sometimes, it felt like the price was worth every second. Even with the limits, the rules, the parental commands, the phone remained the portal to a world beyond the walls of your home. It was where friendships deepened, where identities were shaped, and where you first learned that connection was both a gift and a responsibility. So yes, you'd hear, "You've been on the phone for too long," more times than you could count. But each time you'd answer with a smile, knowing that on the other end of that line was someone who thought you were worth the call, whether it lasted 5 minutes or 50. And isn't that what really mattered?